Ava, welcome. Today's a special bonus episode with your girl Mom B. I got a special guest, John Jordan Esquire, aka I call him Jack. Jack, you want to say hi to everyone?
Hi everyone, glad to be here.
Hi.
Hey girl. How are you today?
Good.
How are you today?
Good.
Alright, we're gonna get started.
According to the documentary 13, the U.S. is home to 5% of the world's population, but houses 25% of the world's prisoners. This means every 4 people in the world, 1/3 of the U.S. incarcerated. How did it begin?
A study done by the University of Florida Racial Justice Crime Center revealed that even though Black people are 14% of Florida's population, we make up 48% of the state's prison population. How do we stop systematic criminalization and over-policing of our community?
Lawmakers often focus on punitive measures rather than addressing the root causes of crime and pass hard crime policies that fill prisons instead of investing in education, mental health, economic opportunities, and housing. By focusing on prevention, they reinforce the systematic inequalities that this country is rooted in. How do we force lawmakers to shift from punitive policies to prevention and investment in our communities?
Okay. Hey Jack.
Hi.
How are you?
Okay, ready for this discussion.
Good. Well, before we get into the main discussion, right, we want to know a little bit about you. So what inspired you to want to be an attorney?
I grew up in the 60s. In the 60s, that was a period.
I grew up in the 60s, and in the 60s, that was a period
in the throes of
when
change.
law
There had been a
was
lot, not only legislatively,
in the throes
Civil
of
Rights Act,
change.
Voting
There had been a
Rights
lot,
Act.
not
But
only
there was a lot,
legislatively, the
there were a
Civil
lot of
Rights Act, the Voting
decisions
Rights
which
Act,
attempted to
but there were a lot of decisions which
redress
attempted to
racism, particularly
redress
in the legal system.
racism, particularly
Around
in the legal system.
1980, 1981, I decided, well,
Around
maybe that's what I want to do, try to
1981,
be
I
an agent for
decided,
change.
maybe
And
that's what I want to do, try to
I
be
went to
an
law
agent for
school.
change.
Well, the tide
And
was very different then. That was middle of the
I went to
Reagan
law
era.
school. Well, the tide was very different then. It was the middle of the Reagan era.
School where I went to was,
And
I want to take the civil rights course to know what
school
to
where I
be
went
against.
to was I want to take the civil rights
my
course to know what to be against.
Career took on a lot
And
of,
my
detours and
career took on a lot of, detours
I did some things,
and
private clients that work for state agencies.
I did some things, private clients. I worked
Alethia's
for
case
state agencies, but
ended up happening
Alethia's
because I
case
was
ended up
affiliated with a
happening
group
because
called
I
Florida
was
Rising, used to be called Florida Now, and
affiliated with a group called
Organized
Florida
Florida.
Rising, used to be called
And one of
Florida
the
Now,
people
and
in that organization
Organized
was
Florida.
Diane Jones.
And
who
one of
worked
the
for
people in that organization,
Diane is
Diane Jones, who worked for the organization
in some
at
ways
the time.
a very pivotal part of the
Diane
story
is
of Alethia's sister.
In some ways,
But
a very pivotal part of the story.
She had
is
asked me if I
Alethia's
would,
sister.
go visit
But
Alethia and
She had asked me if I would
look into
go
her
visit
case, see if there
Alethia
was
and
anything that could be done. And
look
over a
into her
period of
case and see if there
time,
was anything that could be done.
not
And
only
over
did
a
I
period of
come
time,
to care very much for Alethia,
not only
I
did
very
I
much was
come to
trying to
care
see
very
what
much for
options
Alethia,
might be
I very much was
available
trying
to
to see
her.
what
There weren't
options
very many because she had
might be
gotten, she
available to
received
her. There weren't very many because
life
she had
without
gotten, she
parole.
received life without parole.
This is about you. Hold on, I'm gonna pause it there. We're not there yet. This is about you. But you have given the audience a little bit of what this story is centered on. So we're gonna pick up on that in just a moment. But before we go there, tell the audience a little bit more about your past in terms of the cases that you've represented
What I did, I did
before
some,
Alethia.
that wasn't the basics.
A lot of what I did, I did some
did,
criminal, but
I
that wasn't
was
the
mostly
basics.
in the murky
You
world
know,
of
part of what I
family
did.
law.
I was
And
mostly in the murky
then
world
I
of
became
family
involved in
law.
foreclosure defense.
And then I
For
became involved
a number of
in
years once the
foreclosure
foreclosure
defense.
crisis picked up.
For a number of years once the foreclosure
2022,
crisis picked
I
up.
was dealing with a
In
foreclosure
2022,
client.
I was dealing with a
did not want to
foreclosure
deal with
client
anymore.
who
I'm retired.
I just did not want to deal with anymore. And I thought, I'm retired. I've had enough of you. And I did whatever I could.
And so once I
withdraw if I
retired,
do it. You need to find another lawyer.
Right.
And so once I retired, I kept Alethia's case. It wasn't in a place where I could let it go at this point, so I've continued with it.
That's what I wanted to ask you. Like,
Well,
why
there's something
would
that
you keep
hadn't been
Alethia's
done. I
in
hadn't been able
particular?
to get her,
Well, there's something that hadn't been done. I hadn't been
and I
able
wanted to
to
try to
get
do
her
that before I
released.
fully went in.
Right.
And I wanted to try to do that before I fully went into retirement.
By the way, you guys see
Thank you for that.
Jack is
By the way, and
shades. He
by the
is
way,
a
you
blind
guys see
attorney.
Jack with
I
his,
call him the Daredevil.
with his shades. He is a blind
to me, he
attorney.
is.
I call him the Daredevil. Because to me he is a superhero in the things that he's trying to do.
Just so you all know,
Advocate for the
this
special
man
woman,
is
yeah. So,
That's,
just so you all
care
know,
and time.
this man is
I've been-
amazing in the depths of
it's been an honor to
care and
witness him and
time.
his relationship.
I've been, it's been an honor to witness him and his relationship involved with Alethia,
He is a
and
superhero.
even get to meet Alethia myself.
So
So
then going back
he
to
is
the
a
question.
superhero to me. So then
In
going
the
back to
past,
the
Governor Jeb
questions,
Bush has enforced what
In the
someone
past,
may
Governor
consider
Jeb Bush
aggressive harsh law.
has
One in
enforced what
particular
someone may
being,
consider
law and
aggressively harsh laws.
The Offender
One in
Act,
particular being
also
the
known
Law
as
and Prison
the
Release
Three Strikes Law.
Reoffender
How
Act,
has this
also known as the
contributed-
Three Strikes Law. How has
Well,
this
there were-
contributed to mass incarceration?
In the 90s and beyond. This was just a
In the
number of
90s
laws
and
were passed,
beyond.
other
This
states
was
as
just
well as
a
Florida.
number of
In
laws
addition
were
to
passed
the
in
federal
other
crime
states as well as
bill
Florida.
passed in
In addition to
1993.
the
Michelle
federal crime bill that was passed in
Alexander, Jim
1993.
Crow, makes
Michelle
reference
Alexander, in her
all
book,
these
The New
laws.
Jim Crow,
and
makes
people-
reference to all these
people were
laws.
scared.
And
People associated crack with black.
people were scared.
And
People
even,
associated crack with black. And
most of the politicians
even,
were for this. For white, it was probably
most of the
coded
politicians
racism.
were for this, or
black
for
legislators
white, it was probably coded
also
racism, but there
supported
were
this
black
legislation.
legislators
Seen
who
as,
also
well, if
supported this legislation. It was seen as,
incarcerate enough people,
well, if we
the crack epidemic
incarcerate
will end
enough
because they
people,
won't be around
the
to try
crack epidemic will end
commit
because they won't be
additional crimes.
around to try
It's
to
an experiment
commit
that
additional
went
crimes.
horribly wrong.
It's an experiment
that's
that
interesting.
went
But I
horribly
think later
wrong.
on, and I don't know if you
Something
know
that's
your era
interesting
at the
too,
time,
because I think later on, and I don't know if you knew
At
your
the-
era at the time because you
me
did grow up in the Ronald
reading
Reagan era.
as I am now and interested in
Reading
laws.
as I am now interested in laws and things of the sort, and particularly NPR is a really good source in terms of like learning about history. It comes out that in the Reagan administration, the government was a part of pumping like crack cocaine into black and brown neighborhoods. So with them also pumping it into neighborhoods and then having essentially the war on drugs, how, I don't know, I guess for me, it's like, what was it presented to you at that time? I guess for you it was like, they weren't necessarily saying that they were the drug pushers as well as the enforcers.
I mean, what was
There had
interesting
been
about that
stories
is there had been stories
a governmental
out about
entity, CIA, and maybe others
Mhm.
putting crack in.
a governmental entity, CIA, and maybe others,
Mhm.
putting crack into the
All as
community.
soon as those stories
And
came out, you never heard about
as soon as those
It's
stories
as though
came
the
out,
government just
You never
clamped
heard
down on all
about them
the
again.
media.
It's as though the government just clamped down on all the media, and all the media shut up.
It wasn't just like neighborhood
Oh, so it was
conversations.
It had
also
been
being
leaked
leaked into the news.
briefly.
It wasn't just like neighborhood
Yeah, I
conversation.
forget.
It had been leaked briefly into the
But
news.
they
Yeah, I
recollected
forget
like
who the
grandmother
individual
telling
was that I was
them
speaking
that
to, but they
everyone
recollected their like
that
grandmother
Reagan
telling
was
them
essentially
that everyone in the neighborhood knew that Reagan was essentially responsible
So how
for
does
the
this
crack cocaine being
link to
distributed.
Alethia?
So how does this
Alethia
link
became-
to Alethia?
Alethia became
heavily addicted to crack.
Alethia heavily addicted to crack.
There are various reasons
She,
why that might have happened. She did
you know, there are
experience
various
life trauma,
reasons
but
why
beginning
that
in
might have happened. She did experience
she
life trauma, but
began
beginning in
using
1983, she
on a heavy basis, and
began using crack
she
on a
committed
heavy
a number
basis,
of
and
offenses over the years.
she committed
to
a number of offenses
try and get
over the
crack.
years
She was,
to
by anyone's definition,
try and get
an
crack.
addict.
She was, by
She was
anyone's
never
definition,
offered
an addict.
drug
She was
treatment.
never
Her
offered
only option was prison.
drug
So she
treatment.
has
Her only
spent
option was
probably
prison.
half her life,
So she has spent
or a little
probably
over half, in prison
her
over
life,
the years.
or
So
a
what
little
the
over half
pattern
in
would be
prison
is she
over
would
the
go to
years.
prison. She would seemingly
So what the
doing
pattern
okay.
would be is
She
she
had
was in
learned
prison.
some
She would seemingly
skills.
be doing okay.
She got out of
She had
prison,
learned some skills.
seemed to do okay.
She
for
got
a
out
while,
of prison.
and then went home to
Seemed to do
Sebring,
okay for a while,
Florida, where she
and then went
lives.
home to
And I
Sebring,
think
Florida,
at
where
that
she
point,
lives.
probably there was a void,
And I
and she
think at
describes
that
it.
point,
she
probably
talks
there was
about herself,
there was
she
a void. I mean, she
angry.
describes it as she
She
talks
felt
about
like there was
herself,
no
when
one
she was
who could really hear her.
angry. You know,
no one
she
to
felt
talk
like there was
to.
no one that could really hear her.
Probably
No one
lonely.
to talk to.
And I'm there was at some
Probably lonely.
point she went back
And
to
I'm, you know,
crack, and the cycle would
There
go.
was at some point she
again.
went back to the crack, and the cycle
In
would go again.
2004, this is when
In 2004,
been out a little
this
over
is
a year.
when
She had
she had
begun
been out
to
a little over a year.
contemplate
She had begun
her life.
to
I mean, she recognized that she really didn't have anything to
contemplate,
show
you
for
know,
it.
her life.
And
I mean,
while
she
the time
recognized that
she
she
was
really
out,
didn't
she
have
was
anything to show
enrolling
for
in
it.
school.
And while the time she was out, she was enrolling in school. School
She
would have
planned
been
to get
paid
a
for by the
GED.
Division of Vocational Rehabilitation.
She knew she
planned to
had
get a GED.
some crack on her. She was trying to figure
She
out
knew she
how to
had
deal with it.
some
She,
crack on her. She was
she
trying
was
to
still,
figure out
they
how
call it the
to
addiction literature.
deal with it. She, I
contemplation
mean, she was still,
stage.
they call it in the addiction literature the pre-contemplation.
Meanwhile, that she was
Stage.
supposed to start school that Monday, and she
Meanwhile,
on
that
Saturday.
she was supposed to start school that Monday, and 2 days
Diane and
before on
Alethia were
Saturday,
together, and somebody calls
Diane and
Diane.
Alethia were together.
Wants
And
Diane to go.
somebody calls Diane. Wants
setting her up
Diane to go,
take it,
you know,
to sell drugs to somebody.
you
As we
know,
know
setting
now,
up for to take it to
they
sell
were after
drugs to somebody.
Diane
As we
was
know
set up in a
now,
sting operation.
They were after Diane. Diane was set up in a sting operation.
Diane and Alethia, Diane
So-
convinced Alethia to drive up over. to
Diane and
the
Alethia,
abandoned
Diane
hotel with her.
convinces
She
Alethia to
sells-
drive over to the
Meaning Diane
abandoned
sells
hotel with
$20
her.
for crack cocaine.
She
got
sells,
covered cop
meaning Diane sells
Alethia
$20 worth of crack
gets
cocaine to
arrested
the
along with
undercover
Diane.
cop.
and charged with the same
Alethia
offenses
gets arrested
as
along
does-
with Diane
as was Diane.
and charged with the same offenses as does.
Diane only had one conviction.
As was
She was
Diane.
offered 4 years.
Diane only had one conviction. She
Alethia
was offered 4
had-
years.
Had
Alethia
numerous convictions. In fact, at the
Had
time
been
of
had
her trial in
numerous convictions. In
2005 was
fact, at the time
22
of her
convictions.
trial in 2005, it was
Did get her
22
habitualized as a
convictions.
repeat offender, but it didn't happen
So
for
she did get
a while.
habitualized as a
And
repeat
it got-
offender,
and it
but it didn't happen
this time
for
over
a while. And it got
$20
it
bag of
happened
crack.
this time over a $20 bag of crack cocaine.
She had
Pause you for a second. So you said
you
that
said
she had 22
that drug
counts.
played a big part
Do you
in
think that that drug played
Oh, I
played
think
a
pretty
big part
clearly.
in
Just
the
because
22
the
offenses?
fact that
Oh, I think pretty clearly.
You know, yeah, I mean, most of her, pretty much
You
all
know,
the offenses
yeah, I
had
mean, most of
something
her, pretty much all the offenses had
Theft
something to do
or
with
writing bad checks.
theft,
There was only
or
one
writing
instance
bad
where
checks.
there was
There was only one instance where
violence.
there
That
was,
10
allegations
years before she got
of
arrested.
violence, but that was,
So
10 years
her
before she
defense
got
was
arrested in the final time.
she really didn't have anything to do with it.
Her defense was that,
Alethia,
she really didn't have anything to do with it. Yes,
but since
Diane sold
money
the
was
drugs to the undercover
passed to
cop,
Alethia,
but since
they
money was
framed her
passed to
within
Alethia,
and the same charges.
they framed her within the same
Ever
charges.
did
So
she get
did
served
Diane
any time?
ever
Diane
get,
served 4 years
and did
because
she
it
get
was the
served any
first
time?
offense.
Diane
She was
served
caught.
4 years
But
because it was the
Alethea
first
had
offense
priors.
for which she was caught.
No,
But because
Alethea was offered.
priors.
No,
Seven and a
okay.
half
Alethia was
This
offered
is still a lot for being a witness.
7.5 years.
Which would have
Which is
been,
still a lot for
within
being
the
a
sentencing
witness.
Which
guidelines.
would have been,
Same crime.
within the sentencing
Part of
guidelines for the
Alethia
same
is,
crime.
she was kind of caught up in a way.
Part of
unfair,
Alethia's,
because,
she was kind of caught up in
Diane
an
actually
affair
sold the
because,
drugs, was given only 4 years. And I guess
Diane
7.5.
actually sold the
And for
drugs and was given only
Reasons
4
which
years,
are
and I
not
guess 7.5.
entirely clear.
And
She
for
went
reasons which
to
are
trial.
not entirely clear,
And the attorney
She went
should
to
have
trial.
advised her, okay, if you go to trial,
and the attorney should have advised
you
her,
get or found
okay, if
guilty,
you go to
you're gonna get
trial
more time. Because
and you get or found
the way
guilty, you're going to
lawyers
do more
work, probably
time.
what happened is a state
Because
attorney probably
the way
told the
lawyers
public defender,
work, probably
if
what
you
happened is a state
bring
attorney
this to
probably
trial
told the public
and you
defender,
lose, I'm going to see
if you bring this to
habitualization,
trial
which
and
means
you lose,
I will
I'm
ask
going to
for
seek habitualization, which
as
means
far beyond the
I will
sentencing
ask
guidelines.
for
In this case, it turned out to be
a
the
sentence
maximum
far
sentence.
beyond
So
the
she did go to
sentencing
trial,
guidelines,
and
and it
was
turned out to be the maximum sentence.
Well,
So
I
she did go to
understand.
trial
Yeah, if I feel
and
like
was
I
convicted.
wasn't even the one.
Well, I can understand
I was
Alethia if I
I
feel
was just
like
there with my
I wasn't
sister.
even the one selling the drugs, and
Of
I
course,
was
I'm
just
gonna
there
want
with
to
my
fight it because I would
sister,
think
like-
that my peers
Of course,
would
I'm gonna
see
want to fight
that
it because
it's
I would think
ridiculous
that
for me to get a max
my
sentence.
peers would see that
being
it's
accompanying
ridiculous
a
for me to
family
get a
member.
max sentence
And
over some of
So
being
for me, I guess
accompanying
like
a
what
family
kind of
member.
personality does Diane
And
have?
so
Because
for
Alethia
me,
can
I guess
just
like
stay
what
home.
kind of
But I know
personality
how I am
does
about my
Diane
sister.
have?
So
She really
well,
could just stay home, but I know how I am about my sister.
pretty
So-
well.
Well, Diane, I mean, I know
Persuasive
Diane,
personalities,
pretty well. And she has
hard
a
to say no to.
persuasive personality,
Come on,
some
Diane,
personality,
come on.
hard
One
to
other
say no
errand.
to. And,
And
come on, Diane, come on,
that
if you
was
just do this one other
Alethia-
errand with me.
He is undoing.
And, that was Alethia's undoing. And then it was,
Her son was, devastated. He was, 12 years old.
her son
their
was,
relationship was still
devastated.
never
He was,
been
12 years
repaired.
old at the time. And their relationship has still never been repaired.
So, I want to talk about
So, I want to talk about what happened at her trial where, and I've been thinking about this, what were the specific things that happened at her trial that showed racism within the system?
I love that you're going there because that was exactly going to be the next question. Like, do you believe there's racial bias that affected how the judge, prosecutors, and the defense attorneys operated within the justice system?
And that is a complicated question, but I'm going to try to answer it in snippets.
Okay.
All right, I would say the first thing that happened in Alethia's trial was the all-white jury. If you read the trial transcript, and I should just say for the record, I had no knowledge any of this until I met Diane and then eventually Alethia, but this was back in 2004. If you read the transcript, in 2005 rather, the trial, it was apparent to me that none of these jurors in the small town of Sebring, Florida, would be able to relate to or connect with Alethia. They just, from their point of view, I imagine that once this case went to trial, Alethia testified. Diane, who came in prison jumpsuit because she was doing time at the time of the trial, or maybe maybe she wasn't in a jumpsuit, but it was known that she was doing time. And so, the jurors probably, it almost really didn't matter what Alethia's defense was or what Diane said. I'm not sure they would have believed it because their life experience was just so insular. There was one black man who was could have been on the jury. Okay, now I need to divert here a little bit because there's a concept I need to kind of go over.
Okay.
There are two ways that people get excluded from a jury. One is a peremptory challenge, which means they don't need to give you a reason, just you're off. Or be stricken for cause.
Okay.
So the Supreme Court over the years has laid down legal precedent that you just can't systematically throw black people off of a jury. But the question then becomes, was the reason for the strike racially
Because he's
neutral?
a person. Yeah.
All right, so the man was stricken from the jury. The state attorney filed for cause for this man to be stricken from the jury. The court, after the defense attorney, the public defender did object. There were some arguments that went back and forth, but ultimately the judge allowed the strike to happen. At no time, and maybe this wasn't even thought of in 2004 or 2005 rather, no one ever thought to, okay, so even if this was a racially neutral reason, it might have been important to try to get other black people to be interviewed as part of that panel.
Her peers.
Yeah, and that did not happen. So that, I think, was a very, fundamental thing that occurred. The next thing, obviously, that occurred was, during the trial, the public defender just didn't do as effective a job as the state attorney in presenting their case. I mean, there were points that seemed to be, missed in cross-examination. I had never met the man. I mean, I hadn't even read anything about the man in the reports that had been, published. I don't know to what extent, if any, he may have believed what the state was saying rather than Alethia. I mean, that's certainly possible. I don't know it for a fact. So she's convicted, and then there's the sentencing hearing. And during the sentencing hearing, then, the state attorney arguing the case, assistant state attorney arguing the case, portrayed Alethia as a person with no remorse. Only thing she cared about was committing crime. He went all the way over, the times that she had been convicted and went to prison. And his conclusion was that she just is not capable of living her life outside of prison. There was one judge doing criminal work for years in Highlands County, and that was the same judge that handled Alethia's cases over the years. There probably should have been just a different judge, but this judge was, probably
The only judge? in
the only
Sebring?
judge doing criminal cases.
I don't know how big Sebring is. Isn't that where you're from, Ish?
It sure is.
Okay.
All right, so this was a judge, Schoenholzer, at the time, and he certainly was very willing to comply with the state attorney's request. So she was charged with three counts. She was charged along with Diane. Alethia was charged with possession with intent to sell crack cocaine within 1,000 feet of a church. That enhances penalties. Count 2 was sale of crack cocaine within 1,000 feet of a church, and count 3 was possession of drug paraphernalia. Alethia did have the pipe and turned it over to the police when she was arrested, and there was less than a gram, like maybe half a gram or 3/4 of a gram or something like that she had on her person. So she got 30 years on count 1 and life on count 2.
Oof.
And she has been incarcerated now for 20 years. And I think, let me see how I want to phrase this. I mean, there was a pretty extensive report that was published in 2017 by a reporter from the Sarasota Herald Tribune. And he went through the records at the time of Alethia. You know, how many people were arrested? How many people was the state attorney dropping charges? How many, and you know, determined that even when black people and white people were subject to the same sentencing guidelines, that black people consistently got disproportionately harsher sentence. He also went to, spoke to the state attorney, and the state attorney at the time, said in 2017 that if Alethia's case was handled differently, she was charged today, we'd handle it differently. Not exactly clear what that means, but it was a statement that was submitted in writing to the reporter. He went on to submit into the same written statement that the state attorney's office strives to treat everybody equally without regard to race. So assuming that that's true, how do you get from all these just discrepancies and discrepancies, even if you're striving for some higher ideal, and there are a lot of reasons for it, but I just want to put out one at this point. And I was thinking of it yesterday when I was speaking to Melina. I remember reading in a high school sociology book a blanket statement: Negroes commit more crimes than white people. Mm-hmm. So if you are an official, if you are in power, or several people, most of society in power has some underlying belief, either consciously or unconsciously, that black people by definition are criminal, that black people need to be controlled, then a lot of things are going to overflow from that, including over-policing, which the reporter documented was also happening at the time of black people only were 10% of Sebring's population, but they accounted for a disproportionately higher number of arrests. As of 2017, the reporter states there were at the time 56 people doing life without parole for nonviolent drug offenses. 75% were black.
So let me pause you right there. So one of the things that I want to say is, in terms of that proportion, this is just solely based on Sebring's population at this point, that the perspective that the reporter is writing from, as far as their population and their.
Yeah, I mean, well, that was his major focus, as opposed to the state of Florida, because the story was about Alethia.
Right, but it's in line with the state, and honestly, with the nation, if we're being honest. So I just noticed that the numbers were close. But then the other part that I wanted to draw you back to before we move forward again is the remorse part. You mentioned that they said that she showed no remorse. When someone feels as if, like, how was she supposed to show remorse, I guess is the question. I mean, if she was accompanying her sister, she was not the person that sold the drugs, and then only to find out that she's being charged with not only 30 plus years, but also life for something. What is that supposed to look like?
Right, and that's a valid point. And then she was kind of, she ends up in this trial with an all-white jury. I mean, the judge asked her, because he was smart, he made a record. I mean, it was a clean record in some. So the judge asked Alethia, do you agree with the jury? Well, what is she supposed to say? I mean, she couldn't,
Right.
you know.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's.
So she
Yeah.
says yes. Okay. Then, you know, I mean, Alethia was pissed off. Okay. So the judge asks her, before I sentence you, do you have anything to say? And she, I feel like I'm being railroaded.
Mm-hmm.
And so, from the judge's mind, I guess the judge, okay, yeah, that's right. She shows no remorse. But you're right. I mean, what is somebody? I mean, it had never come out in trial or during the sentencing hearing that she was beginning to take a serious inventory of her life, and she was, I mentioned earlier, in what
And that speaks to the.
pre-contemplation stage.
So this speaks to her, her attorney, who was.
It was never mentioned whether she, communicated it to the attorney. I don't, I don't know, but it never came out.
Okay. Okay. So then from there, we can go back forward. I just wanted to make sure, I guess for me, it's just making sure the audience knows that all white jury also knows that this judge had seen Alethia prior numerous of times, right?
Yeah.
The other sentences, the other cases that she had, this was the same exact judge. Having a public defender, which normally they have a lot of other clients, other cases that they have to also prepare for. So Alethia had a lot of things going against her at this point. So then now stepping forward, what reforms do you believe are necessary to kind of reduce this racial bias and discrimination in the criminal justice system? Specifically the criminal court system. Well, I guess it goes hand in hand as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, and there are efforts now to, within the Florida bar, within the local bar, to try and study that question. And it's certainly, it begins, I believe, with whatever laws are on the books. Police departments need to try and root out at least the overt bigots in the department. Some of the systemic racism is more difficult because some of it gets to, what are the attitudes about the community, but certainly policies. You can, I think, direct that towards specific policies. You don't need to be, arresting people for a worn out tail, broken tail light. You don't need to be stopping black people because you think they might be driving a fancier car, or some of the reasons that people are stopped.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to be, if you have the perspective, well, we have to over police this community because they're committing the majority of the crimes. You really need to, the system really needs to begin to re-examine that attitude in a very significant way.
Yes.
Once the arrest happens, and what's going to happen in a bail hearing, I mean, all those things, bail, conditions of probation or conditions of incarceration, I mean, all those things come into play, and all of it, unfortunately, race plays a role in it, race and or class.
Mm-hmm.
The options, if I can go to this, about the options for Alethia's life sentence, the options have been very limited. The state has come up with a few exceptions for parole, but Alethia hasn't been eligible for any of them because there was never a date inserted on her sentence.
Mm.
So what I've done, I just did it last week. I don't know what the state attorney's position is going to be. There's going to need to be a hearing on it. I have filed a petition with the court simply asking the court to insert a date on her life sentence so she could be, considered for parole, which in this case would be conditional release. And what that means is the Department of Corrections would come up with some conditions that she would have to meet. It would probably be some transition time in a halfway house or things like that, and perhaps other conditions. What Alethia has going for her, though, is that she tried to appeal her sentence, which she had every right to do.
Mm-hmm.
She tried to do it through pro se, inmates who were, smart paralegals were helping her file, papers. None of the appeals were successful.
Right.
I tried to file a petition for commutation of sentence, but of course this was Governor DeSantis, and they had just amended the rules. They wouldn't give me a time waiver, so she can't apply again for clemency or commutation until September of 2025.
Okay.
But what she can do, if the judge is willing to insert a date on the sentence, is seek conditional release, which is a small thing. It doesn't address the major, issues around mass incarceration, but it is something that Alethia will benefit from. And, since I'm representing Alethia as an individual, that's my obligation. It's just Alethia's story taps into all these other things that are going on around race and class, that are going on in the society. So what Alethia has done, though, even right from the very beginning, she's tried to take a number of courses which were offered at the prison, dealing with domestic violence, dealing with substance and alcohol abuse, dealing with parenting, dealing with life skills.
She became eligible for the prison's incentivized program because of her lack of a disciplinary record in prison. She's risen up within that hierarchy, became an educational ambassador. She is in, even though there's not a date, the inmates lifer program. So she's trying to be in a situation where if she's granted release, that she will be able to live successfully. She's attempting to do all this stuff on her own. And she's trying to make obtain her GED. So in my petition, the argument that I made to the judge was that the attorney's argument in 2004 that she couldn't live on the outside without committing further crime was erroneous, because it was premised on the idea that people are incapable of changing based on their past behavior. And while change isn't easy, it is possible. And Alethia has sought to show that, and I think has done a good job of it.
I love that. I think that it's amazing. So that kind of points to Alethia actually doing what they say the business is for, which is reform. So she is reforming, although she doesn't have a date of release. So it's not even like it's not an incentive at this point, right? That she does this, but she's still doing it. Because it probably also helps keep her mind active, keep her agile and social.
Yeah, it does. And I think the times that I've seen her, that she might expect good days and bad days, but I think emotionally, I think overall she's doing okay under the circumstances that she's in. And I'm hopeful that the judge and the state attorney are going to recognize that. And that isn't to say that I think she's going to need support once she's released, and whatever the conditions are, because, she's been locked up for 20 years. She's going to have to function in a world on the outside, and we need to come up with a post-release plan for her. I need to come up with a post-release plan. Anybody can help me with that. The other issue, which may complicate that a little bit, is that she's a person with a disability because she had one leg amputated. It wasn't in prison. It was an incident that happened during one of her times out of prison. She tried to jump in when her friend and this other man were going to get into a fight, or he was going to jump her or something. Anyway, she tried to get in the way. She got stabbed. She went into the hospital. Gangrene set in on the leg, so they had to jump up and amputate the leg. So part of what's going to be, we're working on, is find a program that will be wheelchair accessible. Interesting, the Inmate Lifers program, I was looking into it a couple of years ago. At the time, they weren't even letting women into the program. In fact, they haven't changed the name of their ministry yet. They're only called it Save a Man Ministry.
Oh. So I see. Okay.
So, Jack, I do have a question for you. What actions are needed to happen right now in order to help in Alethia's case?
I've been thinking about that, and part of there are certain ways this could go. Okay, so in terms of if I will be emailing, I just filed this last week, so I will be emailing the state attorney's office and say, what is your position in this case? So if the state attorney comes back and says something like, actually, we agree, we just want to negotiate some of the particulars, then my intent is to try to do that more, soft sell, because I want to give them an easy way out. And if they come back and say, we're going to oppose this, then I'm going to be reaching out to you all and asking for, petitions, and I'm going to be doing a press thing. So it kind of, I'm going to know the answer to that question in a couple of weeks. I also, and this is hard for me, I am going to be putting a link for GoFundMe, because I do need some help in connection with Alethia's case. Both visits to the prison, anything that might be involved in preparation for hearing, including getting Alethia ready to testify. Those do cost some money, so I will be asking for GoFundMe. I'm not making any money off this case. I'm not trying to. Any money that I receive, if there's anything left over, I would be giving that to Alethia for the time that she's released.
That's amazing. Let me ask you, so since you're retired, you haven't been getting paid for this case. How long have you been working on this case? Pro bono?
Oh, I would say about 4 or 5 years.
4 or 5 years, and then in those 4 or 5 years, you've been in constant communication with Alethia?
Pretty much. And just, periodically, I've tried to see her at least twice a year. I send her, things when I can, money or products. And there's certain companies now that she can purchase stuff, or I can purchase it. Of course, it's a prison, so it's an inflated rate.
Yes, I know. They gotta get the money from everybody.
I don't know. I had to go see her real quickly because I needed to get documents notarized. I needed to get back. We talked for a few minutes, but you I left the next day. She has a tablet. They gave her a tablet. She was mad at me because I rushed. I rushed off.
But I just showed that you have a friendship with her and she values that time.
Yeah, I get it. It was just I was just I was stressed. I made a special trip up there. Document had to be notarized.
Yeah. And, so let me ask you. So of course, would it be okay for people to write letters to Alethia as well? Like, does she get letters?
Yes, she can get letters. They're going to monitor. Anytime you send a letter, if it's illegal mail, they're going to monitor it. But I think letters of support. That you let them know you heard this on the podcast, and I will. I will also check in with her to see. I think she could probably get messages over her JPay. But let me just because I do it, but I don't know if there's that is monitored as well. I think I have a lot of good arguments to present to the court. I think they should buy it, but there's no guarantee. And if that happens, then press, money, and everything for an appeal, because this would need to be appealed. And I think now I've concluded, my comments pretty much. If somebody has, what happened in my is it okay? If somebody has a question or comment, attempt to address it.
Okay. While you're saying that, yes, let's look at the comments. Do we have any comments in the audience?
One of the questions was from Power Up People, and they were asking about the treatment and current jail conditions that Alethia is under.
From what I can tell, I think, relatively speaking, the conditions for her are not too bad. She gets to, go around without being handcuffed or shackled. She lives in a dorm room with, I guess, maybe 40 or 50 other women. That can't be good. But she, it's not a cell. She's had problems with medical care, and I've had to write a couple of letters on her behalf. But she has done a good job of advocating for herself and for medical needs, and she's managed to do it in a way that people have tended to at least pay some attention. The medical care in prison is very, very bad. The medical condition on the outside, I think, is only marginally better. So, but I think overall it's probably better than many.
Okay, and I know you had mentioned like the potential of us being able to write letters. What other things can we do to help Alethia right now?
I said write letters. I said, and I'll put that as a postscript. Just maybe help being able to purchase items for her. She needs certain items for hygiene. She needs she has an opportunity because she in the incentivized program to get better food. So there's a way to do that. There are some funky restrictions. So I think in one of the things you have to be on our visitor approved list, and the other you don't. I need to just clarify that. So that might be. I will pass this on to Melina so she can put it on the postscript, and then I would appreciate, and I'll be looking to try and obtain some funds to continue this.
So that is our call to action, folks. Anything that you can do to support Alethea, whether that's in writing letters, whether that's in buying packages, putting money in her commissary, or even like donating to Jack's Cash App, so that he can continue to support her, the legalities of her situation.
Yes.
Really greatly appreciated. Jack, do you have a number in mind as far as how much you're trying to raise for coverage?
I would like to raise about 10,000.
And I think that 10,000 is fair, especially if whatever is used is going to Alethea, right?
Anything that would be left over after all this is over.
That's wonderful. I love that in piece of it. All right.
And then how you get that GoFundMe up and running, please let us know, and we will also share the link for that.
And we will have all of Alethea's information and one little bundle for you all. But it will also be included at the end of this episode. And in order to get to our website, it's in our bio. So with that, we thank you all for joining us. Thank you for starting the hard conversation with us.
Getting comfortable with being uncomfortable.
And remember, love, peace, and support Black businesses. And before I end, so talking about Black businesses, I know we're always showing you guys our shirts that's on our bodies, but I wanted to show you Janelle Boutique. This is a shirt that they made for us. This is our crop tops, and it also has verbiage on the back. It's local in Orlando, Black-owned business, speedy service, great customer service, and just all around. If we're going to get to a place where we grow as a community, in the Black community, then we got to start supporting our businesses. So I always love highlighting them for sure because they're local, but any Black businesses. If you have any Black businesses that is tried and true, feel free to DM us your favorite Black business. Ish, do you have any?
Oh, I have a mountainous list. I think we should do an episode dedicated to Black businesses.
We can do that. That can come. So with that, thank you all for joining us.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 Black Trollspective.